let me start the last activity of our session on visual art and design. And this particular activity, I believe, is absolutely important. It somehow frame what we did during these 3 days, but it's also open up new perspectives, and I really believe will provide us with some proposals on outcomes and use of outcomes, right of use of outcomes of artistic research. So it's our seminar, open seminar on open artistic research, and it's my ultimate pleasure and honor to host this seminar together with Dr. Till Ansgar-Bauer. And
thank you so much, Andris.
And I think that we had so many problems and had information about artistic research in so many dimensions. So at the first seems like there is nothing to add, but when we start think further about outcomes and possible outcomes on artistic research, there's another dimension opening up, how to share this information, how to provide achieved solutions, how to inform about problems, how to share this knowledge. And of course, first steps always is when we think about artistic research is to find how this issue is being managed in the related fields in scientific research on the one side and artistic practice on the other side. And I think that from such position we could somehow compare what we would like to propose in the field of artistic research with practices that we know exist in science, and particularly in the natural science. Let's always stress it and emphasize it in English. And also this distinction between open science, as it's more usually practiced in the field of natural science, and open scholarship, what's usually mean work in the field of art and humanities and social science and fields. And there are some dimensions and differences between open science and open research. And it creates sometimes huge confusion and misunderstanding, and at the same time it's easy to compare with what we know about from art and artistic practices, open art, open practices, open artworks. What do you think about this? Yeah.
Well, I would add an information just at this point, and this is a very pragmatic one. We are doing this seminar here in the context of a project which is called EU for Art Differences, which is a sub-project of an alliance of 4 fine arts academies throughout Europe in Budapest, Riga, Rome and Dresden. And it is a project on artistic research. That's why I am here, that's why we are here. And as it is funded by the European Union, of course the European Union also directs our views to needs and questions that they find relevant. And I think as an artist, of course it was always quite logical for me that I want my work to be perceived and to be understood and to be discussed. So open accessibility of my artistic practice never was a question, but suddenly the point popped up that the European Union wishes research to be open access, and that this also affects our alliance in their outcomes. And it's a funny thing that as an alliance of art academies with mostly artistic practitioners, suddenly you have to think about how to position yourself in that context. But I find it extremely relevant, and of course I think that the accessibility of the outcomes, especially of our project, but in general of artistic research, should be as open as possible.
Yes, thank you. I really would like to thank, because it's a really important point. We are doing this seminar in the framework of this project, so we are dealing also with framework of legal framework installed by our statehoods and by European Union. And in European Union there is some standards of open access, and that's being used considering outcomes of research, and that's something that's well known and never discussed. But as you very well mentioned, there is a big difference in these practices and outcomes of practices, because the research outcomes quite usually in the previous years were put under the paywall access to the scientific journals, and they were inaccessible for the most part of society. And it also was the reason of these tensions and tensions between communities, between society and science, and scientists or researchers were not admitted as an integral part of society, but somebody who is doing somewhere else and who are elitists and on other positions. So in European Union there are two well-known standards about access to scientific results. It's a gold standard, which means that everybody could access, and researchers or research institutions usually paid for this possible access, and green access. But both of them are I believe both of them are in some sense different from what we are trying to establish and what we are trying to propose. And I think if we not going to discuss open research in the natural science, but if we are going to think about open access in artistic research, so we should propose relevant, similar, but in the same time different aspects of these standards. So in the case of gold standard, it could be the same situation, that all content is available for free immediately. It's like a dream of any artist. What you are creating, it's immediately accessible. But the gold standard in the field of artistic research would mean, and this is our proposal as a work group who is working on this issue, it could mean also that all content is in the same time immediately licensed for sharing and reuse via Creative Commons licenses or similar licenses. So it's open for reuse, for copying, reusing, and opening again.
Well, reusing is of course a vulnerable point for artists, right? So we have to have that in mind. And another point related to the gold standard, which is, by the way, just something quite expensive to do, to have, is that we should not lose out of sight the size of our alliance and the size of the academies involved. So we really have to find something pragmatic which allows us to find adequate answers to the needs.
You are absolutely right at this point, and we should bear in mind also right of artists. And
Definitely.
Artists are producers who rely on the copyright, so they should have possibility also decide themselves also right concerning outputs not only of artistic practice but also artistic research. So there is another proposal, another kind of standard that we could use. It's like a green standard that's the same accessibility, all content is available for free immediately for anybody, but all content is licensed under a different kind of licenses. There could be open licenses, there could be commercial licenses that provide more rights for the producers, for the artists themselves. So. And dealing with realities because of the things as they are, and quite well understanding that gold standard and green standard is somehow quite utopic position, and probably we could propose in some cases, in some processes, and even then, even if we could try to impose such standard on such kind of production of artistic research as graduate works, even then students would have rights to withdraw or licenses, withdraw open licenses, and students should have rights to impose their moral rights, moral copyrights on what they created. So we should admit that the most usual way would be some kind of hybrid standard, and it would be hybrid open access content, a mixture of open access content and also closed access content. And as in previous case, we should mention that all content would be licensed under the mixed licenses, and reuse would be restricted at such case.
And there's one other point to be mentioned, which I also did not at all have in my focus before the project started, which is that for academies, and they are just representatives for the system in itself, we have really different approaches to the question of intellectual property rights of artistic work produced during studies in university, or also even during their PhD. So we have partners where the institution claims the property or the user's rights, at least, of the artistic and scientific outcome. And this, of course, also influences or affects the way how we have to deal with the data and with the material in general.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And going further, dealing with realities, even more with realities, we could also mention that while the bronze standard is not part of official European Union framework, it's more like something that is being established ad hoc by practices. Bronze standard is something that we are dealing with on everyday basis, and even if the content is available for free immediately, it's quite usually that we could not have any kind of information about licenses, and it's like a very, very often with content on the internet. You could find this content, and but you have no idea could you use it, and if you could use so in such a way you could use. Of course, while sitting in the educational institutions, we are in privileged situations that we could use some content for educational purposes or research purposes. But if you are outside of educational framework, if you are outside of academies, if you are artist researcher on your own right, so who would grant you rights to use or reuse this content? You are in the quite gray area.
Yeah. And as we saw in our last session, just to relate to that, there's so much artistic research happening outside the institutions. And although we discuss it now from the perspective of the institutions, so much is happening which we cannot really frame. It is highly important to have that in mind, the protagonists in the field.
You are absolutely right, and if we would start to discuss about rights of artistic researchers, and if we even would like to propose some scope of rights for anybody who would like to conduct artistic research, So we are now at the necessity to admit that we have no one definition what is artistic research is, and there are plenty of practices, and it's just insight from another discussions about kinds, methods, problems and components of artistic research. What if we are thinking about artistic research? What we are thinking about temporary construction, kind of self-reflection, the political or artistic autonomous zone, or the rhizome, or verbalization, or visualization of some kind of research processes. And we had plenty of examples during these 3 days of different kind, different methods, different approach of artistic research. So what we are going to propose, where we would like to put this framework about this right to use some content.
And just to add, one other question is, of course, not only what is artistic research, but also for whom do we do it? So this is also relevant in the aspect of accessibility, for example, because if we follow the idea of the European Union once again, that the outcome of sciences and humanities, but in our case artistic research, should be made fruitful for the continent and for the alliance, then we also have to reflect on what we call third mission, so the interaction with society, and this also means that there's a need for the data to be approachable, and yeah.
You are absolutely right, and while we have some kind of framework and some kind of matrices, we could say that scientific research is something that is constituted by such a model, such approach, and such methods or such technologies, and artistic research is being constituted by somehow different methods or somehow different technologies, use of technologies, or even what's even more important is that artistic research is being conducted in some kind of contextual environment, while the scientific research is mostly being conducted in like a stepping on some kind of meta position toward what's being researched. But question of audience remains open, and not only question of audience, but question of nature of knowledge, what we are going to find, what we are going to present, what the information is, that what's the outcome of research. Is outcome of research practice, or is outcome of research some kind of new knowledge, solutions? What's the outcome of research? And if we could find what we are going to achieve, what's the aim of research, then we should answer this question you mentioned also before. For whom we are preparing, for whom we are preparing this new knowledge, and what kind of knowledge for whom.
And also the question which is related to when you start to compare artistic research to scientific research in terms of being possible to create discourses between the areas of sciences, of humanities, and of arts, then for me the question comes up what to do with all the data of the process itself. Because I think there's quite a common viewpoint towards artistic research that maybe not the outcome, the object, the artifact is so relevant, but the process in itself, as on one side very personal, but on the other side also very very logical aspect, because you need it to come to the result, but usually in artistic practice you hide it, or you don't mention it, or whatsoever. But if you have the idea that your research, your artistic research, is to be reusable or adaptable or attachable for other researchers' works, then it's not only the outcome. It's very logical in medicine or in physics or in chemistry. It's absolutely crucial to provide the information how you came to the final result. But what does this mean for artistic practice? Because then should you start to make videos of every hour of practicing the violin, for example?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. It not necessarily means that we should collect data in such ways that everybody could reproduce any kind of artistic practice, because artistic research is not the ways like we are conducting our practice. Artistic research is the way how we use artistic means to find some solutions to some problems. It's something that I really believe. So there could be open another components. There could be open specifications, why we are going, what we are going to do, open content, open knowledge, open educational resources. And what's really important for artistic research, open such resources like galleries, library, archives, museums. This way should be open. This way, how to reach this solution, but problems and solutions of problems could be, no form of the solutions could be quite different. It should not be in the same way. Like not every artist should not produce the same artworks. They should produce different works.
I didn't want to say that they should produce the same artworks through through the fact that the process is documented. But during my own artistic PhD, I had the experience that after maybe 4 of the 6 years phase or 3 years of my 6 years phase doing the PhD, I came to a point when I suddenly understood why I had been doing all that for years, and not only during the time of the PhD, but far beyond. And that was crucial information on a very individual, maybe also psychological level, which gave me insight into my concepts of artistic practice and gave me an answer on where my creativity comes from. And this is, of course, something when you really start to be vulnerable on one side, which is not a problem, but the question is how do you deal with these aspects that are relevant for the project and that really form the outcome, but that come to you in some ways, and that's why I say you need to have a focus on the development and to document it somehow and to find a way to make it visible, be it in words, be it in images, be it in I don't know what.
Yeah, and not only data, not only aspects of processes, but I really believe that in artistic research we also should develop some another attitude to the process of assessment. And if in the natural sciences we are extensively using peer review and extensively using double-blind peer review, and as researchers who are also practicing in academic researches, I also were extensively part of the double-blind peer reviewers and reviewed different submissions to different science fonds in different European countries or to different conferences, and it's somehow this part of this academic industrial complex, as it was mentioned before. But all this traditional double-blind peer review, it's really lacks some kind of transparency, and as such there is no, my feeling is that there is a big problem with also with quality culture, and it's not that all peer reviewers are on the same level, and but because of the lack of transparency, you have no possibility to admit and control it. So, and I believe that in artistic research field, we should propose from the very beginning, that these peer review procedures should be open. They should be open. Identities of peer reviewers should be known. Reports should be read by everybody, and participation also would be absolutely open. I believe it should be one of our proposals that we would mention at our project, and to put forward as political policy initiatives.
Yes, I completely agree with you, especially also because, artistic research is not really formalized in the way that you could find easily 200% fitting peer to review your work, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe it's different in music or in performative art, but in fine arts, when I think about my PhD phase and my colleagues, everybody was approaching their topics in such different ways that it would have been almost impossible to find a fitting peer reviewer for anybody of them within the peer group. So, of course, you can have extremely important discussions and exchanges, but if you approach it from the level of from the academic level of adequate quality of the peer reviewer, then it starts to be really tricky. And therefore, I completely agree with you that open identities make it just also easier to interact with the reaction of the peer reviewer, because then it becomes discussable in a very positive way.
Discussions should be always. Peer review should not be kind of hierarchical power imposition, and so I think that also another aspects of all this research process, if we ever mention components of artistic research in the same way like we are mention components of scientific research, like problems, like theories, like methods, like concepts, like models being used, and they all should be open. But what's even more important, I believe, is this open participation. This could come with some kind of involvement, and as you mentioned before, auditorium. I really believe that auditorium should not be just a passive auditorium, but we should find a way how to involve people, and not like subjects of data gathering, but they should be active part of this artistic research process. They should feel how it is, that they should participate, they should be part of teams, and then we could open this process and
create open ivory towers somehow, right? If we still need the ivory towers, then at least we should open them.
Yeah, it's right mention. And now I will switch over. Second.
Yeah, well, that's just a small appendix to what you already said.
But I believe really important. Yeah, there's really important points that should be mentioned.
Yes. Yeah,
and one of them is data. So please
provide
clarification on data.
This is what I already said. The question is, which data are the relevant ones? Which data are we talking about? If we talk about objectivity in artistic research, or the possibility of objectivity in artistic research, and if we talk about personal approaches, individuality, the question of reproducibility, for example, as well, which in artistic research obviously does not work in the way it does in sciences. So how do we deal with the concept of data? And as I already said, my personal experiences, are they data which we have to provide or which should be accessible in order to deepen the insight in what I do for somebody who comes from outside? And is it only about the final data or the processual data? How to store these data and how to provide access. Of course, everybody has the right to protect their data without any doubt. But that also means that if you try to keep them available, then you as the artistic researcher are in the need to be the one who gives access, which puts you into another additional position, because then you, on one side, of course, you can control what happens with your data, but you also have to control it and you have to be available. Otherwise, your work just disappears in your own personal storage, right?
Absolutely.
And about the aspect of reusability of data, this again refers to the question of what data we are talking about. We see that the discussion on artistic research is such a fluid process that nobody today really knows if there will be a need for certain data from artistic research processes done today after 20 years, and maybe if that need will relate to data we today don't even think are relevant. So how do we deal with that unclear situation? So these are all not answers, but it's what bothers us in the Alliance and what we have to deal with somehow. Also, of course, the internal and external reusage of data. To what extent do you have to open your data to the Alliance, for example, and beyond the Alliance? Do you want to make differences between those levels of protection or availability?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Like what amount of data you are ready to share with your students, with your colleagues, with auditorium? I believe they always would be different amounts, and sometimes you are going to share with your students quite personal information, quite personally defined data, and data that actually constitutes another level, and their data that should be protected by some rights or something. So we are in the discussion on the next problem.
Yes. Well,
these data should be fair.
These data should be fair, and that's also a need from the side of the European Union, that we have to provide fair data in terms of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And the interesting point, in fact, is that when we applied for the Horizon funding, we of course knew about that, but we had not gone into depth about that issue. And when we started to think about how to deal with data storage and with an archive for our project, we started to talk to librarians from different art academies. And one even openly said, well, that's why we never applied for Horizon funding, because we simply don't manage to make understandable to our students that fair data are needed and that they also have to contribute to that. So, we applied, we got the funding, so no discussion about fair data or not. we just have to go for that. And therefore, I would just like to mention our possible solutions for the project, which came out of months of discussion and investigation. What we will do and what we will have is we will have a project portal at the research catalog, which is provided to us as an alliance project, and in which we can store the data, in which we can publish the data as well. And maybe I should just say 2 or 3 sentences about the research catalog, right, Andris?
Of course,
because it's maybe not known to everybody. The research catalog is a project of the Society for Artistic Research, and I have to admit that I don't know how many years ago it was funded. I think it's around 15 years, but I might be wrong. It is hosted by the Royal Technical University of Stockholm, which allows to store the data more or less forever. And you can, as a user, as a single user, you can create a profile in which you create so-called expositions, which are can be quite complex formats, like something between an artistic exhibition and an article, including videos, including sound files, including images, etc. So it's really a fascinating format. And when you decide to publish that exposition, then it is on the same level of validity as a scientific article. You have a findable publication in the web. You get the IPR code for that, and DOI here, sorry. And therefore, it is available for the community. And of course, the research catalog in itself already forms a sort of community because of also the journals attached to it and the growth of users, the number of users, the number of academic partners also joining and sharing their portals. So this is really something which is fitting for us, because we don't have to create something which is attachable to the systems of our libraries, for example. When we started to think about databases created for our own needs, we came to technical issues that, once again, for the size of our alliance and for our academies, would have been completely crazy. So this portal will be partly open to everybody. In some parts, there will be limited access for the alliance partners, and so that we can also use it for teaching issues, and we can also use it as a database for the project, where everybody who joins as an individual artistic researcher has storage space, for example, for metadata, for example, for processual data. And yeah, that's our solution right now. And of course, it's not an answer to everything, but it's
first step. It's
yes.
First step, yeah, of course. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And just would like to add that right management on the research catalog is more like copyright management in the sense of artistic production. But all these problematic issues that we mentioned concerning open data and with data is 5 aspects of data and necessity to establish in the future some place where to store this open data, because if you need to provide open data, there should be place to provide open data, because research catalog is usually it's provide outcomes of project. There's some kind of production, but all these questions that we just mentioned, they should be solved in the future with future solutions. So we are just made our first steps, and that's what we would like to share with you.
And of course, we are looking forward to share it also with our students, because that also will be a step to be more visible for them. And it will be a step, for example, also to deal with the whole issue of publication in a maybe more ecological way. We don't have to cut trees down to have the results of our artistic research visible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Let's burn coal.
Exactly. Oh, my God.
Yeah. At this point, we could say that we made our points, and we would like to open discussion further, and please join us.
Should I take a third chair for you here?
Yeah.
In terms of this moment for artistic research, when, from your bird's eye view, when do you believe that we'll have to stop justifying what is artistic research? When do you think, in terms of an European Union perspective, we've settled and we have our validation, and then the questions can be others, like in science. We don't have to justify that there's academic research taking place, because us at Filmio, we've gone and analyzed that question, quite a few people at this conference. When do you think that we do not have to justify ourselves and it's settled? And in terms of our work as institutions, as alliances, the questions will be others. And what do you think it will be the next question?
It's really right question, and in the same time I could say it's a really tough question, because I don't think that we are in the stage that we could say that we had to justify what artistic research is. It would be very, very far reach conclusion very far, because as I could say, as the head of the doctoral studies program at my academy, even in one institution, even among students who are studying at your program, you have plenty diverse opinion about what the artistic research is, and there would be no one attitude, one approach, and if you try to provide one methodology or one approach for all students, they would spread and they would use different approach. And there is different point of view and different approach among professors at my academy, and I just could say that artistic we could probably make some big models, big frameworks, and try to put, but even if we manage somehow to get some general description, it's absolutely not big possibility to say that we could perfectly write down what's artistic research and to justify it in the way like it would be not contested in the future.
Yeah, well, from the perspective of Dresden, I think we will have to justify it for quite a while. So this is also what makes the alliance so interesting, that we are really at different points of development of how artistic research can be included into the teaching and into the curricula. I think there are different levels on which we have to justify it, right? We have to justify it within the academies when we start to introduce it. That's something that happened, I suppose, to everybody who tried to install artistic research in a fine arts academy. So then, especially for the case of Dresden, with the federal system of education policies, we have to justify it with the Saxonian ministry to be able to even to get the possibility to shift from the existing models to other ones, or to have additional models for artistic research. Then, of course, there's the need to discuss the whole issue with the European Union. And, well, what can I say? I think that's quite a big task, because we are not too many talking about this issue in the context of the European universities. Luckily, we are two alliances, as you already said, and so we have to join our forces to work on that. But, well, maybe the upcoming question can also help us, or one upcoming question can also help us to bring artistic research into the view of the European Union, and this is the question how to deal with the fact that artists, I think, even if they stay in their ivory towers, and even if they refuse to be connected to society at all, they are connected to it, because that refusal, that gesture of taking yourself out of the discourse, is a society-related action. And therefore, I would say that we have to discuss into depth how we can establish the idea of artists being active parts of society without losing their individualities, without losing the possibility to do crazy things that nobody understands, without keeping them away from crossing boundaries which may frighten us, and so on. So the freedom of artistic practice, and this is of course also to do nonsense or to do things that cannot be understood now, but maybe after 10 years, that's something we have to protect without doubt. But at the same time, I think in the world of today, which really has other problems than fine arts, we have to find an answer as artists to that situation that allows us to do what we do and to make it relevant to the context and to society. And I think if we manage to do that, then we don't have to explain to the European Union anymore why artistic research is relevant, right? So, but this can be a task. Well, this task is definitely too big for us right now and for the two alliances. But nevertheless, it's something which is discussed, which is already discussed. But we have to transport it and to transform it and try to find partners to work on that.
Can I ask another question? So, in terms, not to be a devil's advocate, do you think that there can be a problem in the fact that, for instance, in terms of science, in terms of, let's say, engineering and what is considered scientific research concerning engineering issues in academia and engineering work outside and other fields of work, you have this clear notion that there are certain things that will be within the umbrella of academic research and other things that are business and are treated outside. And not everything needs to be, not all engineering processes need to be under the academic umbrella. They can be dealt with business and so forth. The same thing with film. You can have academic research, but then you have film funding bodies and so forth that will not and don't have to be under the umbrella of artistic research. And do you think at this moment we are trying to place everything concerning arts within the umbrella of the artistic research, and there are certain things that in academic terms we just need to let it go, like when you say the borderless, or the ones that we can't evaluate, the ones that we can't reach conclusions, and perhaps we need to let go of those, and those will exist, and it will be artworks, and it will be in galleries, but will be funded by art foundations or other bodies. That not everything that artists do need to be able, don't need to be the answer for all the endeavors of artists. I know it's a complex question, but I hope you understood what I mean.
Yeah, I hope I understood this question right, and I think it's a really right question. In the first, we also should admit that it's not necessary to describe any kind of artistic practice as artistic research. In such case, we could create some inflation of term in the way like it would become meaningless, and there should be demarcation between artistic practice and artistic research, and I think it was a first step. One of the issues I just have to admit, and probably something that I just forget to mention at my presentation. Our art academy actually consists on practices in visual art and also in the field of design. So usually when I'm discussing with my students or saying something about research methodologies, and I'm just fluently overcome these boundaries between visual art and design, and there is plenty of design methodological approaches that could be acquired and that could be used in the visual arts, because many of design methods and the way how design is structured to solve problems, and how design is structured to reach auditorium and to reach users, and to have information about users and contexts in which product should be used, and all other things, and projection of foresight of futures, and plenty of design methodologies could be very productive way, and very could enrich any kind of visual practices. So there is this some fluency between them, and we usually stress more on artistic research because it's really some kind of uncharted territory, and we feel about design methods and researches as more charted, as more well known, for 50 years describe it, and some things there is less surprises, and artistic research is a place of uncertainty, uncharted, and absolutely dark woods, and we are in, and we try to understand how to deal with it. And sometimes dealing with this is our opinion, and sometimes dealing with bureaucracy, dealing with politicians, and we are fluently changing our positions from artistic research to design research. And if you are conducting design research, it's always quite easy to provide that there is some additional value, some social economic impacts, and some impacts on user and auditorium. It's not so easy to deal with artistic research in such a way, but I think that lessons learned during design research should be used also in artistic research. And then what the Thiel said, that artistic research should become relevant part of society. Artists also should demonstrate that they are a relevant part of society by using artistic research. It's not necessary that artists should be relevant part of society practicing art. It's freedom of them, up to them, and nobody is going to take away their artistic freedom. They could be also useless as artists. It's absolute their freedom. But if we are going to justify artistic research as some kind of rational method, we also could provide with outputs and results that are relevant for society in general.
Yes, I completely agree that I would be completely misunderstood if it seemed that I think every artist is an artistic researcher and every artistic process is artistic research. That's of course not the case, because otherwise when we try to introduce the topic in our academy, some professors said, yeah, but that's what we are already doing. We just don't call it artistic research. And but we are doing research, we are collecting data, and we are producing artifacts. So what's the difference between our processes and artistic research? And then you really come up with just explaining that the idea behind the project and the idea of getting into a dialogue and making the results fruitful in some ways, and leaving the sector of the object to be sold in a gallery, for example, that this really makes a difference, definitely. And so I would never talk about the future perspective of fine arts in general, but and in that sense, of course, I will let go, because this is, of course, the decision of everybody how to deal with his own production. But what you asked also touched a point in which I think fine arts, and I can only talk for fine arts, have a special position also in terms of artistic research, because they are mostly not connected to what you could call exploitability, which is also a hot topic for the European Union. And in fact, well, there is the art market, of course, but the art market covers, I think, 2 to 4% of the artists leaving academies afterwards are able to live from their artistic production. So we know that it's almost a disappearing percentage. And creative economies usually do not really touch fine arts. They touch design and so on. And in the Film EU Alliance, for example, you always have to work with stakeholders for third funding, etc., which in fine arts is not so much the case. So yeah, it's a specific situation I'm talking about, right?
And I think there is plenty of new problems that we could open at this moment, at this stage. And I should admit that not every graduate work that we are going to prepare in professional doctorate study programs will be artistic research in the strong sense. Not every time when somebody creates something inside third cycle or inside the master degree, it's always automatically constitute artistic research. We should admit it, that professional or practical doctorate that was the first reason 20 years ago to start implementing and about methodology, but that's not the case. We could admit that it's also should be something different, and probably artistic research is some place of, as it was somewhere mentioned, of freedom between art market and galleries practices and curatorial practices, and artists are being always squashed between, and there's like you're feeling this pressure. If you are working in the art field, you're feeling pressure to be in line with some kind of trends and tendencies. And I really sincerely believe that artistic research would provide artists with some kind of freedom to address problems and address solutions to this problem, elaborate solutions on her or his own, without looking back at the curators, without looking back at the gallerists, collectioners, and somebody else. Yeah. But it's really big and open question, and I could admit that, as Sarah also said, there are plenty of problems, and yeah.
And there's, I think, also a big task for us who are working in the field and trying to promote artistic research. And this is, of course, the fact that we have to have an eye on the quality of artistic research. Because if everything that claims to be artistic research and to be somehow in between scientific or academic discourses and artistic practice, if that per se is of high quality because it's artistic research, then we will never manage to bring it to the level on which we have it to be discussed, to be relevant for the European Union and to be relevant for society. So this is, and I have to admit that whenever I get a book about artistic research in my hands and start to check the artistic positions, I have difficulties if I do not have more information about the artists in advance, because artistic research outcome can be quite hermetic in itself as well. And if you don't have the measures to understand how to deal with quality aspects, then it's really tricky. And this means that we have to do lots of clarifying processes also within the institutions, and we have to communicate it to the outside, and we have to find the borderlines between social activism, artistic work, research processes, and bring it together in the best possible way somehow. And this is already, once again, a huge
Huge task.
huge pile of tasks.
Using this time for a final question? I don't know. In another life, with another hat, as mentioned, I was a curator at the American Art Center. And in terms of the membership, we realized that the audience was quite conservative most of the time. By this, I mean that, for instance, in music, the jazz lovers will go to jazz, the classical lovers will go to the classical. Same thing of the theater lovers would mainly just go to theater and cinema in terms of art house and mainstream. And we as curators, what we tried to do was to somehow to break this and to be a catalyst for exchange in terms of how we've created the programs. So I'm wondering if you believe that at this moment it exists, or if it should exist from the European Union, serious funding so that we do transdisciplinary work, really, in terms of alliances, and as researchers, that to be transdisciplinary should be a focus in terms of artistic research, and that serious funding should be available so that we are out of just our comfort zones and our fields, and film and media researchers explore and work with musicians, with visual arts researchers, if more needs to be done, so that we take this work of learning from each other and finding cross points more seriously, if there should be more funding, because funding is, without funding we don't do anything. What do you think is happening in terms of this?
I can say that, of course, that would be a dream and a need as well. And if we just think about the presentation of Dominique Lemley yesterday, who, with her Art in Action research methodology, opened the field towards discourses in the global south and beyond the Western concepts of artistic research, then it's really the interdisciplinarity goes beyond that, and we should not only create an interdisciplinarity between the different artistic processes and approaches. Maybe we should also think about interdisciplinarity with protagonists from society. What, for example, happens with the Creator Doctus movement in Amsterdam, and what should, of course, happen if we also on a local or national level want to prove that art can play a role and maybe can prove better next time in a comparable situation to the COVID pandemic, that if the possibility for artists to be active in the way they used to be active suddenly is not possible anymore, then nevertheless they do relevant work. So I completely agree, and I would love to work with you on the question how those two alliances can really push the European Committee towards other ways of thinking. That would be extremely precious.
Thank you. I just would like only add, as the first part today, we mentioned this Collins and Evans monography in 2017, Why Democracies Need Science. As a starting point of metaphors of birds, it was used. But I think in order to get some funding, we should answer this question, and we should answer not only a question about science, we should answer a question why democracies need art. Mm-hmm. And even more important for us to answer why democracies need artistic research. And if we would find the answer why democracies would need it, I believe then in next years that will come, the next years will be rough. We really are in the situation of the next Cold War, and it would be even more colder than previous one. And there's this whole geopolitical shifts are quite crazy. It's we have feeling, for example, and here in Latvia for 3 months that like we are living in some kind of surreal reality. It's like you just forget to switch off apocalyptic catastrophe films that you in the evening it's somehow continuing and we could admit that the next 10 years would be hard for European Union, also in economical terms as well. And there would be decisions where to put funding, and if there would be more funding in defense, in propaganda or disinformation fighting or things like that, and what's the role of art and there is bigger risks that there could be situations when politicians should decide, we are not living in the time that we could allow ourselves such kind of luxuries like art. If we could provide some rational reason why democracies need artistic research and what's the main general purpose for society, and there was an example from Finland was the first work in doctorate in it was Helsinki Art University, was about on flying planes. It was written by sculpture on flying planes. And I usually ask my students, how do you imagine the situation what the politicians could admit that taxpayer money were spent to elaborate research about flying planes? Yeah, you know, doctoral students are quite expensive. And what's the reason why society should spend money for on flying planes? And probably all visual art is somehow on flying planes from the design should be there's a reason why industry need design, why society need design, but visual art it's if we know they have artists who could not draw in classical way, actually what's the point of them? What's the point of to educate them and to provide them with money? And this artistic research is the same issue. And if we could justify, and then there is only one solution how to justify such kind of luxury for in a society. If you could create innovations in culture and artistic research is some kind of innovation. It's not like it means that we are not dealing with culture in the same way like we deal in 19th century or 20th century. It's something really different. If we are not just naming in different way what we did before, but if we really try to create some in different ways, so it's some kind of different practices that never were before. So there is possibilities that we could say that innovations in culture could create atmosphere in society for culture of innovation. You know, and if you and that's something that we could trade to politicians. If you would like not to lose competitiveness of society in 10 or 20 year time, you should invest in the innovativeness of culture, in the culture of innovation. There should be culture of innovation in society. Otherwise, we would stay in the same position. Otherwise, and now I would have some probably demagogical geopolitical arguments. Otherwise, China, India, or Russia will go further. They would. And everybody of us who studied the history of science knows that in 50s the effect of Soviet Sputnik effect. Sputnik effect actually created all these outcomes of managerial studies and innovation method studies. And also in the history of design research, we could be grateful to Sputnik moment because of Soviet Sputnik. There were huge intents to invest in innovations, invest in methods, in research methods, in design methods, and many achievements of 60s was because of Cold War. So Cold War could also play some productive outcomes for society. It's not like I like Cold War, absolutely no. I hope that we will never live in such situation like in my young years and being afraid of when the next nuclear war would start and things like that. But this contest between societies, between values, between civilizations, they could provide space for possible contest. But it's not like it's guaranteed, like it's warranted. It could be, but it also could not be. The next 10 years also could be the worst time of stagnation in the history of European Union if the politicians would put ourselves just in the way like we are going to, there's easy terms. We are going to pay price for freedom, and all restrictions that you would have. Freedom of expression. Sorry, it's price for freedom to restrict your freedom of expression. Academic freedom. Sorry, it's price for you should pay for freedom to restrict academic freedom, and so on. It could be, and also funding that's in a risky situation. And if you had not funding before, so what's the reason to provide funding now? And so there is big challenges and possible potential advantages, but also big challenges.
Of course, but nevertheless, I would say the two alliances we are talking about right now are just, they had such a long path to arrive at the point where we are at the moment that we should just try to convince ourselves to be optimistic.
I think it's best. It's best.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sorry for my pessimism, kind of, but we really made a long way, and we should be proud of it. And never before in the history of European Union there was such situation when two alliances and universities are going to develop notions of artistic research. It's really.
Is there time for a final question? Now it's perhaps difficult question because it's in terms of harmonization. Because a discussion as well when we come to consider artistic research is because we have quite discrepancies in terms of legislation, national legislation. For instance, in Portugal, only professionals with a PhD will be able to supervise a PhD. And now that we are researching and analyzing artistic research, it's this realization that sometimes, for instance, you have someone that is incredibly proficient in documentary, award-winning, with a very specific, interesting work that could help and be brilliant supervising a specific artistic research work, but that person can't because they do not have a PhD. So I'm wondering if in terms of PhD, so we're leaving all these professional artists, filmmakers, musicians, whatever, out of like the golden gates of academic endeavor. So I'm wondering if in terms of this aspect, and so that we could be more open as EGIs in terms of being able to take in and learn and develop, even from a business perspective of increasing quality, know-how, to embrace these professionals, if there should be like, I don't know, a Bologna to harmonize, so that, of course, it's something within the academic house, and it needs to have a specific standard and objectives and evaluation. But if we should harmonize so that we are allowed to have these professionals as co-supervisors, and even in terms of the evaluation process, if there's, at the moment, in terms of the work we're developing, we're reaching a stage, and this is just a personal, I'm not speaking as, let's say, as someone that belongs to FilmEU, it's a personal perspective, I want to emphasize this. If we do not need at this stage to have some kind of consensual perspective at the European level, because otherwise we're missing something, and we're leaving quite a few people that would help us reach other levels of research out of what is at the moment a closed system. So it could be your personal institution or national views on the topic.
Well, I think I can neither give you the national nor the institutional answer from my side. I can just very spontaneously say that I'm always afraid if you talk about something like Bologna 2, then I'm afraid that coming to common sense means even to lose more freedom, because it's always easier to go to the smallest common viewpoint than to open the perspectives of those one hesitating. So I think things should happen on different levels at the same time. Indeed, I also agree with you completely that the potential of non-academic protagonists should not be lost in that context, and that we should try to involve them. And there are already movements to do that on a local or national levels, and they can hopefully be sort of a blueprint for other nations to follow that pathway. And I think this is really something we have to approach on the national level, and as soon as we do it, have to approach it on a joint level of the EU as well. Because the other way around, to try to open the discussion on the EU level and then to go to national level, won't work probably. But I think it's extremely relevant. And when I think about my own PhD, then I had lots of highly important discussion partners that were not in academic professors' positions and that supported me strongly for my work, that could have been my supervisors if they would have been eligible. So I tried to involve them, and it somehow worked out. But of course it should become much easier to do this if we have a task in the focus which is really relevant. A question, why does it have to be strictly on the traditional academic level? If, for example, we already have 2 or more supervisors for some projects, why shouldn't one of them possibly be somebody from, or an institution from outside?
Yes, thank you. I fully agree with all this proposition made by Till, and I could only add that this issue is really another big one problem, and no, let's illustrate. For us, it took 15 years to establish professional doctorate in art, starting from 2007. Actually, I myself, 2006, first time met Mika Hanola from the Helsinki Art Academy. My first impression about artistic research was, I could be quite fair, my first impression was, what's a kind of, no, it's kind of snake oil. Are you going to produce and sell snake oil? Yeah. Why we need to put together? There's artistic practice and there is classical sciences. I worked in the field of art history and visual semiotics and all these things. There are plenty of methods how to address and research artistic or visual cultural problems. Where is this necessity to create some kind of hybrid space? And then really realized that no, because Mika Hanola was really somebody with some kind of visionary feelings. That no, there's necessity to create something. There is deficit for knowledge that's being created in some different ways, not produced by artistic work, not produced by classical research. And yeah, you realize, of course, knowledge are a diverse thing, and of course there should be place for knowledge that we don't know. We don't feel this deficit of knowledge because we just don't know that there is such knowledge and it could be produced in such a way. So we started in 2007, all this long journey to establish. But nevertheless, nowadays also it's easy to convince, comparatively easy to convince politicians that there's necessity to establish professional studies in doctoral level and other things. But to convince that there is necessity to fund some different, absolutely different practice. It's not artistic practice, and that's not research practice, but something different like artistic research. Actually, I think it's quite a challenging task. You could sell, it's like a something to somebody. You could sell somehow. During the previous Horizon times, it was possible. I worked as national representative on program committee on sixth society challenge. It was social and humanity science, and there was call like impact of art on society, and you could create some kind of spaces where this artistic research could be put in, but to get this feedback from politicians that we could also establish artistic research as some kind of core activities are different. It's big challenge because I believe that many of politicians would be in the same position like I myself was 16 years ago. The first is shock. Why you need something else? You have a possibility to create art. You have a possibility to research art and describe art, and even you could get professional degrees. Why you need some practice something else? Yeah. And I believe this is really a big challenge. And then of course, there's the next question: how it would be relevant outside academies? How it would be relevant? And for big surprise, there is much easier to answer. And many of artists nowadays, visual artists in Latvia, are practicing what they believe kind of artistic research. They are describing exhibitions. They are not necessary that they could apply for funds or things like that. They feel that also it could be some kind of methods or approach how to create, how to produce some kind of artwork and outcome. And I think this could be also one of the way if we establish it by the practitioners themselves, that they could feel different. So when I just create artworks, when I study for creating art practice, and when I really try to create some new knowledge by the means of art, and in such way, artistic practice could be embedded in society. It's the first in artistic society, and then in society in general. Yeah. Not the top down. Not like we bureaucrats from art academies could go to the politicians and say, no, you know, we are working in art academies and we know that there is necessity to establish artistic research practices. But I believe the only way would be bottom up. If there would be more artists who practicing artistic research, and there will be productive and relevant for society outcomes, that this bottom up would work, and top down. I'm afraid that there's no way to establish top down funding for artistic research. But probably I'm wrong, and we should try.
We will try.
Okay. I would like to say thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.